Wagwan fam, it's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on the 17th of September, which is a Thursday, and we're talking about Covington versus Woodley today, which could be very depressing. But there's some other fights on that card that are good, and we're going to do a load of questions too, because I wanted to catch up on some. People keep sending them in and I don't keep answering them, so I thought I'd get some done. News. Sajara Eubanks is taking another fight about 10 days after the last one she took. One championship has signed Victoria Lee, who is the youngest, the youngest of the three that I know, Lee siblings. She's 16. I mean, yeah, the MMA in one at this point, I'm just like, is it even still a thing? You're mainly doing kickboxing and Muay Thai now. And then Santos versus Teixeira was scrapped again. I think last time it was Teixeira had COVID, and now Thiago Santos has COVID. Everyone got COVID, as we discussed last week. I mean, if you're an American person, I suppose there's some in the UK too now, truthers about COVID, and you watch MMA, it's got to be a bit of a wake-up call that, yeah, lots of people are getting this. Actually, the interesting thing the UFC are doing now, apparently, is that they're doing, what are they called? EMG? Whatever it is where they look at your heart. Apparently they're sending everyone who's had COVID in the UFC, or people who've tested positive, they're sending them for, is it EKG? Fuck. The tests on the heart, to make sure there hasn't been any damage, and to keep track of, the effects of COVID after you've had it. But yeah, that's mad. Both sides of that bout have now caused that bout to be scrapped. Not quite as weird as Ion Cutelaba getting COVID or testing positive for COVID twice. Bektik's fight is off, I think that was this weekend. Renato Moicano is out of a fight with Magomed Mustaev, which is, that was a good little fight lined up there. But what they managed to do, just today, before I started recording this, was they managed to get Matthias Gamrot in to fight Magomed Mustafayev. And I was answering a question about him last week, Matthias Gamrot. He had a fight with, he was the KSW champion. He had a fight with Mansour Barnoui, which he won. And he went to ADCC and had a good little competitive match with Gary Tonin. So very good grappler. And they're putting him in with Magomed Mustafayev, who is, Mr. Spinny Kicks. But then I was watching Mustafayev versus Riddle, or Riddell, however I want to say it, earlier this week. I was looking at some Brad Riddell stuff. And basically, Mustafayev lost that fight by spinning and falling over several times. Every time he fell over off a missed spin, Brad Riddell would just be like, oh, okay, I'll have top position. That was basically the difference in the fight. It was proper strange because I get so many requests for Brad Riddell, studies or looking into him further. And both his fights in the UFC have just been pretty messy. It's not been... you hear City Kickboxing, you think, oh, super clean kickboxer, that'll be interesting. And no, he's just sort of messy. But anyway, Mustafayev versus Gamrot, that'll be interesting. And then today we get to hear whether the... I don't even know the details of this, but there has been a class action anti-monopoly lawsuit going on for the last 6 years. If you follow Bloody Elbow, they do a lot of stuff on it. Bloody Elbow gets a lot of shit because they do some stuff that, even somebody as rabidly eat the rich as me would admit is a little bit SJW. But they got people super mad the other day by just listing a load of MMA fighters who had QAnon beliefs or believed in ridiculous bullshit. Not even QAnon necessarily, like Spike Dudley. No, Spike, whatever his name is, the ginger dude, the Alpha Ginger. He simultaneously hates the Jews but is pro-Zionist, and it's very strange. But people got so mad. It was amazing. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that there's no, deep state conspiracy, but maybe don't get your facts off a person pretending to be a spy on a message board. But this lawsuit's really interesting because it accuses a range of anti-competitive, or what are they called? Anti-competitive practices. And it's interesting because there's people like John Fitch involved. There was a lot of people involved, actually, at one point, but Kung Lee is another important one because obviously he had the famous failed test, appealed it. His B sample was clean, but basically the UFC had already slandered him or libeled him or whatever. So it's really interesting. If it goes through, obviously there's still many phases for it before it even becomes an issue, but it's certainly an interesting way to shake things up. And I believe this was the lawsuit through which we actually got the original information last year, that the UFC gives a 12 to 18% revenue cut to the fighters, which is information that they didn't give out normally, wouldn't have to give out. Certainly you can't work it out from fighter revealed purses because so few commissions require that. And I think Vegas is now not requiring that. But, that it was getting blood from a stone to get the split out of them, and then they had to reveal it for this lawsuit. And we all realised, fucking hell, in the NBA and the NFL and the Major League Baseball, the athletes who have a players' association get 50% of the revenue. They're not all paid evenly, but they are paid out of 50% of the revenue. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Just like the fact that this lawsuit's going on has revealed a lot of information and is worth half-arsedly keeping an ear to, like I do, where I'm not even entirely sure what the details are, but it's certainly interesting. However, by the time this comes out, they could have thrown it out already. So they're expecting that in a couple of hours at the time of recording. So moving on from the news or the not news, depending on how that turns out, we got some fights going on this weekend. It's actually a pretty decent card. Headliner is Colby Covington versus Tyron Woodley. Covington, this will be like his second fight in 3 outings against a guy who's pretty much lost the ability to pull the trigger. I mean, he had RDA before that, but RDA wasn't quite as shot as Lawler. And if Tyron Woodley fights like he fought his last 2, this will be absolutely dire. Well, I mean, it won't be dire as a fight because Colby Covington very good at keeping a high pace. And it seems like that is the thing that really throws Woodley off, because even at his best, he did very little, but he had this reputation of being this monstrous hitter who could spark you if you stepped in on him at the wrong time. So guys did less and less, and he became dangerous by merit of there not being an awful lot to counter, so he just had to wait for the opponent to step in. It's like we were talking about last week, there is a point of really diminishing returns as a counter fighter, because if the opponent stands back and doesn't attack and bites down on their mouthpiece to step in each time they're going to step in legit, you can counter them easily. But if they're constantly putting pressure on you, throwing everything in the kitchen sink at you, you start going, no, cover up, move away. I'll wait for a better shot at that, and they just stay on you. Actually, we were talking about this with the film room I released yesterday. We did Israel Adesanya, and it was Adesanya versus Pereira, number 1, and Pereira really he's trying to cover up and throw back, but he just keeps dropping points and points and points because he's taking jab to the head, right to the body, jab to the head, or left hook to the head, right to the head afterwards. 4 punches, and then he'll swing back at air, or he'll just cover up and go, oh no, don't feel I can get it off here, and then move away, and then Israel Adesanya will throw 4 or 5 more strikes at him. As the counterpuncher, the more you rely on being a pure counterpuncher, the more you can be thrown by really aggressive volume and pace. And part of the Woodley lackadaisical game plan is apparently because he doesn't like to use a lot of energy and he worries about gassing out, particularly in 5-round fights, which this is. He hasn't been in a not 5-round fight for a while. But then you've got the other issue of being the power puncher, where the later you wait to connect the punch, the later you wait to score the knockout punch, the less likely you are to manage it because you're going to be getting tired. So really, when you see a fight like this, the first round is always interesting because if Covington stays back and hangs back, that gives Woodley the chance to get through a round without using up a lot of energy, but also the chance to wait and pick his shots. Whereas if Covington gets right in his face, you have that either he's going to run onto the big punch when Tyron Woodley's at his quickest and most explosive, or he's going to start the decline through the fight for Woodley, and it's just going to get worse and worse from there. So eyes on the first round, as always. I think that first round against Lawler's quite interesting because, it's sort of interesting because Lawler's a fellow southpaw where Woodley's an orthodox fighter. But it's sort of interesting in that Colby stormed out of the gate with like a Superman punch and high kicks and shit just to jam his head up against Lawler. And Lawler was pretty good at shaking him off, and then Lawler, in the course of defending takedowns and sprawling, it was just driven up back towards the fence. Whereas Tyron Woodley has that horrible habit of putting himself on the fence. And I think that's, against all these grindy wrestlers, that's just an invitation for a fight to spiral downwards. it's kind of like, in striking and in wrestling, there's always this idea of, and particularly in BJJ and things like that, there's always this idea of layers of defense. And one of your key layers of defense in all of them is movement and ability to create distance between you and the opponent. By putting yourself against the fence, in striking and in wrestling, you have put yourself down, you've backed yourself down to the layers of defense that aren't movement based, that are entirely based on like you using your strength and your wherewithal and either covering up or digging underhooks, and you're making it a very physical fight, which is probably what you wouldn't want if you're the guy worried about your gas tank. But, more than that, you've just given up the heart. That should be for everyone else for certainly against people like Usman and Covington who do so well along the fence, that should be the first thing that they have to deal with. That's your first line of defense. You're going, okay, well, let's not even worry about the fence until he gets me there, and then you can spend 3 minutes of the round where he's struggling to just get you there. If you give that up in the first minute because you want to stand on the fence, it's just typically not a smart thing to do. Worked well against like Wonder Boy, because Wonder Boy is, if you saw how uncomfortable he was picking at Woodley on the fence, and then you saw it more recently against Vicente Luque. He'd hurt Vicente Luque when Luque was coming in, and then he'd back him onto the fence, and as soon as he threw more than one punch, Luque would hit him with a left hook coming back, and Wonder Boy would go, oh no, can't do that, I can only pick at him with one punch at a time when I'm on the offense and he's on the cage. But more than that, this speaks to, but more than that, the question in this fight is how shot is Woodley? Because he has fought well coming off the cage. It was something he did throughout his entire career. It's just now that it's catching up with him because he's given it to these strong young fighters in their prime, and he might not be anymore. And then more than that, he's got the same sort of thing going on as Robbie Lawler, where he's struggling to pull the trigger. He goes to this corner. If you heard Hooft in the Robbie Lawler fight, just being like, why aren't you throwing punches? And Lawler being like, yeah, sorry. But Dean Thomas is in Tyron Woodley's corner, and he keeps asking for combinations. I make jokes about it all the time, like drink every time Dean Thomas asks for combinations. But you're wondering, like, does Tyron ever throw combinations? Is he just a monster in training, and he's throwing beautiful combinations into low kicks and shit? Basically, if you're Dean Thomas or whoever in his corner, what you really want to do is just be like, do that stutter step thing where you cover 10 meters in a couple of seconds and hit the guy like he used to do. It was the same one combination. It wasn't even really a combination. It was like a stutter step, shifting jab into running right straight. He did do a cool pull counter against Darren Till, and that's the other thing about this matchup. Colby's a southpaw. Woodley has cracked a couple of southpaws with good right hands. Till, I was going to say Koscheck, but he's not a southpaw. But at least it's more of a rear hand matchup than orthodox versus orthodox. That was something that Gilbert Burns was doing wonderfully. He was putting both hands on top of Woodley's hands, and then Henry Hoof would say, if you can touch his hands, kick. So he'd smother the hands and then low kick him. Or low kick him, rather. So really what is expected here is that Woodley's going to become possibly the first fighter in UFC history to lose 15 rounds back-to-back. Because he lost 5 against Usman and then 5 against Burns. And the problem with the last 2 was that they were young and in shape, and they just kept pushing him, and he didn't like it. And he just sort of, he did enough to survive. Now, Gilbert Burns, a bit more of a scary hitter than Covington. I'd say Usman and Covington are about the same threat as strikers. I know that, one won their fight, but they did go back and forward, and neither of them is like a monstrous hitter. Neither of them's particularly crisp hitter, is what I'd say. Their striking, both of them, just plays to their wrestling, really. It's not like their main form of attack. Actually, no, that's not what I mean either. No, it's their striking builds with the wrestling as a part of a rounded, grinding, exhausting attack. They're not typically one-hitter quitters. But anyway, I think that's more time, to be honest, than that main event is due. It would be lovely if Tyron Woodley knocked Colby Covington out, but he probably won't. It'll probably just be 5 rounds of... And in fairness, Covington is much more entertaining to watch smother people than Usman. He will actually keep punching people, keep working, keep diving in there. But I also think that makes him a bit more hittable than Usman. I think he's a little bit more reckless. There were many exchanges against Robbie Lawler where he'd just leap in behind a Superman punch or something, throw a couple more punches, and then drive his head into Lawler's chest. with no real guard there or anything. Whereas with Usman, you'll see him move towards his opponent, stick a hand in the chest, pick up the single leg, hide his head in between, not just like lunge forward. We'll see. My betting advice would be bet on Covington because he's almost a sure thing. And then the price of betting on Covington, you'll happily give that up to see him get knocked out by Tyron Woodley. However, if Tyron Woodley scores a knockout, then everyone does that thing where they go, Tyron Woodley was never boring. What are you talking about? Like, some dipshit on Reddit was like, I'm convinced the Michelle Waterson boring argument is just a false narrative advanced by Jack Slack. And you're like, what? Did you just not watch her last 2 fights before this one? So your co-main is Donald Cerrone versus Nico Price. And Donald Cerrone on a major slump, even by Cerrone standards. I think he's 4 in the hole at this point, 4 in a row, that is. And obviously, January he got smashed by Conor McGregor in a very short time, but just before that he took a rough knockout against Justin Gaethje. Before that he had a more competitive, but still ultimately an arse-kicking by Tony Ferguson. And then actually his most recent fight is probably in his best, which was against Anthony Pettis. But then we are only like a year and a half removed from his fight against Al Iaquinta, where he was, the best we'd seen him in forever. So he's fighting Nico Price, who is a legit welterweight. I think the Pettis fight might have been a welterweight, but that was just because Pettis is doing that now. But Price is also he came into the UFC undefeated. Vicente Luque was the first person to stop him and beat him. But since then he got starched by Al Hassan, knocked out by Jeff Neal, and then most recently had that beating from Vicente Luque where he got stopped by the Doctor. I think I'll be intrigued to see how big Nico Price looks in this one, because when you saw Cerrone in with legit big welterweights like Darren Till, it was really noticeable. Price has got a reach on him, but I don't think that'll matter because he's not a particularly great straight hitter. He's not a very good technical hitter generally, to be honest. But he can crack and he can take a shot. So I just your plan against Donald Cerrone has always got to be get on him early and hurt him, but if you do it really recklessly, like someone like Alexander Hernandez, you're just going to walk onto knees. I don't know if Nico Price has the tools to actually stick on Cerrone without offering up easy shots on the counter. Khamzat Chimaev is back against Gerald Meerschaert. Meerschaert, obviously a very weird fighter. There was a fight he had a couple of fights ago. He basically let the guy take him down and move to mount to then start attacking his legs. Very weird, very competent grappler. Had a good fight against Darren Wynn. But, they're giving Chimaev just guys who he can wrestle. So previously it was guys who couldn't deal with the wrestling. And now it's Gerald Meerschaert who, basically Meerschaert and Damian Maia are both lined up. And if Khamzat Chimaev wants to stay standing, he absolutely can against both of them because neither of them has the wrestling. Two people who just hate wrestlers for different reasons. But that hype train is, well and truly underway. He's the man of the quarantine. Hopefully he gets the win that he's supposed to here, because they've got another fight booked for him already. Then we get into the weird shit. Johnny Walker versus Ryan Spann. Ryan Spann, not a tremendously interesting fighter. Struggled his way past a 50-year-old big nog. Fought Sam Alvey. Delivered a crushing blow for communism by split decision in that one. Really just another chance for Johnny Walker to do something weird and hopefully score a fantastic knockout. Everyone keeps talking about how he's gone to SPG Island to improve himself. But him, Makwan Abakani, Conor McGregor, they just have this reputation for not producing fighters who are in shape to go the full distance. I hope that they've done something about it. I mean, it'd be nice if he did round out his skills and have a little resurgence, because now everyone thinks that he's a complete bum based off getting knocked out by Corey Anderson and by having that just dreadful fight with Nikita Krylov where he had absolutely no gas tank for grappling, at least. Honestly, the most amazing thing about that fight is that he managed to bring Nikita Krylov's stock down with him. Reason enough to be intrigued as to what he's doing, but again, another matchup that we can't really say anything interesting about. Mackenzie Dern versus Randa Marcus was interesting because I saw this morning Randa Marcus was like, no, I will not be grappling with Mackenzie Dern. And you're like, well, what are you going to do? Kickboxer? You're just telling me not to watch the fight. However, it being Randa Marcos, the way she said it made me think, oh, she's going to lean on her on the fence. Like, I'm going to wrestle, but I'm not going to engage in the ground fight. So I'm just going to hold her against the fence. Fuck, I don't care about that fight. The last one that's really interesting on this card, hold on, let me just check. Oh, Tyson Nam's around, but, whatever. Yeah, Kevin Holland versus Darren Stewart. That should be fun. Whack him, bro. Whack him, bruv. Kevin Holland talks a lot of shit during the fight, which is great fun. Darren Stewart had that great little fight. Who was that against? He was... his corner was just shouting constantly for him to whack this dude, but Maki Pitolo, who he guillotined in round 1, and that was really good. I believe this is his second fight of the lockdown. Got the decision over Darren win, which would have been a nice jumping off point to have a more interesting and exciting career. But then he lost against Bartosz Fabinski in March. Was supposed to fight Marvin Vettori, but again cancelled due to coronavirus. You'd think that Kevin Holland's probably the cleaner striker there. Certainly he looked fantastic in his last one. But Stewart, not bad. I'd consider him more of an all-rounder. And this could be the sort of fight where he just puts in a grindy, workman-like performance. As long as he's not out in the open and running onto left straights, he'll be doing better than that other lad. What was his name? Fuck, the guy that Kevin Holland just knocked out while mercilessly trash-talking him. Anyway, all right card. Not a lot of interesting matchups to talk about beforehand. Let's do a few questions. Hello, Slackjack Horseman. Like any hyped fight in combat sports, this one is a two-parter. 1. Why are people romanticizing the fact that Thais begin with full-contact Muay Thai at such an early age? You will often hear the pantheon of good opinions, Joe Rogan, almost fetishize how early Thais start taking head trauma. Are these people just ignoring the fact that many Nak Muays don't last past 30? Or is it just some form of child abuse that goes unnoticed by a failing government and ignorant people? 2. How do you deal with writer's block? I sometimes find myself stuck when doing schoolwork or writing articles for fun. That the message and information I want to convey is there, but I just can't get the words out in writing. From your Patreon boy in Sweden, Emil. Awful fucking clarinet music ruining fights, bless. Right, let's start with the Muay Thai one. Yes, it's very odd. And I think of it similar to how people used to love talking about how Jack Dempsey used to have bar fights every night and this, that, and the other, and then they'll go, oh no, MMA, that's far too violent. Don't like that. You're like, what? What on earth are you talking about? Those Burt Sugar types who are like, let me tell you about how Jack Dempsey used to go into bar and say he could lick any son of a bitch in the house, and then he'd be down there in the dirt fighting them on the ground, biting and kicking and stuff, and but no, MMA, whoa, clutched pearls. It's just one of those weird things. And I think that's, it's okay to be like to be in two minds about it. I think you don't have to have a clear party line. You don't have to have your manifesto written of what you believe until the morning of the shooting. No, I am very often in two minds about how I feel about combat sports. I like watching people kick the shit out of each other. I don't like thinking about people in the future having kicked the shit out of each other. We all want this world where we can kick the shit out of each other, knock each other spark unconscious, and then get up, laugh it off and go, ha 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 ha, and then live to the ripe old age of 93 and always be sharp and have perfect recollection of all the fights you had and be like, oh yeah, it was a good one, got me face down, slept me, but we were out later drinking together. And clearly, fighting from an early age, whether it's Muay Thai or, you get some very young amateur boxers coming up through that system, guys who have a real boxing lineage, some of those guys some of the families in boxing and people who get their sons into boxing very early or daughters, they're going to be boxing full contact very early. And it does produce brilliant fighters, but it will also produce very, much earlier damage to people. And I think it's especially strange when you think about like a developing brain taking shots as opposed to an adult brain. And this is something that I'm going to have to deal with, and we're all going to have to deal with. If you're a big martial arts lover, you've always enjoyed training, sparring, competing, things like that, and you'd like your kids to do martial arts, you have to at some point put the two things together. You have to decide, is it okay for my child? Well, because especially at that age, it's me deciding my child is getting head trauma. It's not a joint decision. If he's like, I don't want to go to boxing practice today, and I'm like, yeah, you say the same thing about horse riding and gymnastics or whatever else they do. Yeah, it's going to be a weird one. And I imagine my wife's opinion is probably going to be a lot more definite in the no camp than me, who's sort of like, oh, but he'll learn to box really well if he starts young. But, I mean, BJJ is a nice solution to that, things like that, judo. But again, you're still getting beat up doing those things. And concussions in BJJ happen surprisingly often too. I've had friends who have quit grappling because they've suffered a concussion and then they've taken a lesser ding to the head in a roll. And, it just keeps coming back. What is it called? Post-concussion? Is that post-concussion syndrome, or is that just getting a lot of concussions easier than the last one? But, like I said, a lot of these guys, a lot of these Nakmoi are amazing by the time they're 20, and Westerners aren't going to catch up because they've been doing this since they were kids. Rodtang has like 300 fights on his record, and, you're not going to get that level of experience in that amount of time, you're going to be fighting as a child. So, yes, it's strange. And I think it probably a little bit... Well, it's interesting because you always hear about even kids who grew up in the ghetto, when their mums hear about them boxing, the story's always like, oh, and then his mum found out and she said, no, you can't box anymore. And he said, oh, but I'm earning this much money. And she said, oh, okay, keep putting food on the family table or whatever. From Roberto Duran to Benny Leonard to all sorts of people, Barney Ross boxed their way out of the ghettos and so on. But are we more okay with it because they're bringing a better life to their family? Because Rodtang certainly is. There was an interesting piece up the other week. Might have been a One Fluff piece. I can't actually remember what site it was on. But it was about how Rodtang was fighting, and his both his mother and his father are. I think his mum's chronically ill and his dad's terminally ill, but they're both very unwell and very poor people too. And Rodtang was just like, I fight as often as I do to keep food on these guys' table and to thank them for raising me. Yeah, I think no definitive answer to that question. I mean, the definitive answer is yes, it's fucked up. You will get damage to your brain if you are a child getting hit in the head. Oh, God, there was an absolutely horrific video went up this week of some, I don't want to say Brazilian, some South American coach somewhere just kicking the shit out of a child. Like wheel kicked him. And obviously the coach is holding back a bit because he's not trying to kill the kid, but he's clearly trying to hurt the kid. Like, obviously some stupid lesson about how to take a shot and keep moving or keep fighting, but just horrendous. I'd say look it up, but I actually don't look it up. It's fucking bad. Oh, and the second question, writer's block. Well, it used to help that I'd have deadlines from the sites I worked for. Honestly, having Patreon boys who are just there for my content and are forgiving of my timescales probably not been the best for my writer's block. But when I was working for Fightland and Bloody Elbow and Bleacher Report, if something needs to go up this afternoon, and sometimes I'd write shite, to be honest. I think that's one of the things about deadlines. People who think they work well to deadlines, sometimes it's just like you just got to get some shit out, and you're not always super proud of what you do. Whereas since going independent at the start of this pandemic, I've actually been pretty happy with pretty much everything I've put out. Lots of attitudes to writer's block out there that I've read. I mean, I'm a big believer in the Hemingway thing. Firstly, like, if you are distracted or upset about something or worried about something, you've got to go see the doctor. You found a lump or something like that. The things that we do that happen to everyone, but as soon as you're thinking about them, like, life stops. The thing to do is work, because just doing the thing that you're supposed to do will help in some way. I think it was Hemingway said the work always cures it. Not whatever you might have, but it will certainly cure your mind. The other thing that Hemingway said that I really do like is try and leave something in the tank. And if I feel something is going to take more than one day to write, I'll just stop when I think, okay, this is a good point to pick up from tomorrow. It's always good to know where you're starting in the morning, and I think that really, if you are writing a longer piece or a book or anything like that, it's a really good idea to have where you're going in the morning just there ready for you. Stop mid-sentence if you want. Like, that can actually really help. And then something else that really, like, my personal struggle with writer's block is don't make the mistake of starting at intros or conclusions, because they're tricky. That's unless you've really planned it out ahead of time, you're going to have new thoughts as you go through it, and they're going to work their way into the intro and the conclusion. Start where you want to start. Like, I wrote Notorious, The Life and Times of Conor McGregor, or whatever it was called. When I wrote that, I divided up the workload, the chapters I thought I was going to do, the rough timescales of each chapter, and then I set about doing the research. It was a few weeks of just, like, digging out interviews, digging out every screed of information I could get on McGregor, watching all his fights with like because this was when the UFC had like different corner audio and camera for their fights, which was great. They had that on Fight Pass. It was fucking stupid to stop doing that. But, that was all the research and stuff. I think the research is important, especially to me, because I will start knowing who I am going to be writing about, thinking I just saw them fight the other day. I know what I'm going to be writing about. And then I'll get stuck. I'll watch one of their fights and I'll find something, I'll find so much more that I want to talk about. Certainly in my line of writing, it is, you want to be soaking stuff up and then putting it out on the page. It's a lot easier than just trying to write something with what you know already. It's even midway through writing an article, it's best to go back, just dunk yourself under the water of their fights again. Keep reacquainting yourself with the information. But yeah, with the Conor McGregor thing, I was like, I'm not going to start with like his amateur career, his early professional stuff, the loss to Joe Duffy and that. I want to talk about Jose Aldo. So I went and wrote the Jose Aldo chapter first. That was like 15,000 words on Jose Aldo, and then they cut it down to 5 because they're like, well, this guy lost in 13 seconds. And I'm going, that's the point. He was so good. I need to get that across. But within articles, I'm just like, why am I worrying about this bit? Why am I worrying about the flowery stuff? Let me talk about the thing. Let me get right into the meat of it. Start in the middle. Be like, here you can see so-and-so does this. This is important because blah, blah, blah. And then once the writing's flowing, it's so much easier to go back to the intro and the conclusion and sort all that out. So I'd say, treat it as you would anything. Find where you want to go in. Find what you want to attack first. Don't go from start to finish. Read it from start to finish later. But start where you want to start to get the juices flowing. Because it really is a momentum game, writing, to be honest. The other thing you can do is, I can't remember who said this. It might have been Ben Folks, might have been Chad Dundas. Writer's sprints. Might not have been either of them, actually. But where you just say, okay, 15 minutes, no tweeting bollocks to make Demetrius Johnson. I mean, this is what I do when I'm procrastinating. I'll be like, Gegard Mousasi, terrific regional talent, mate. And then I'll just sit there and watch people get mad about it. But yeah, just say 15 minutes, no anything else. Just 15 minutes on this page writing. And that works incredibly well. Sometimes. Oh, cheers, Emil. Actually, linked in with that is a question from... Fuck, they didn't put their name. But they did, they wrote me a very nice buttering up email, which I'm not going to read because, it is weird just wanking yourself off with your own voice on your own podcast. With no one else here to like, tell me off for it. But I'll just read the question. He said, you wrote a book about Conor McGregor, which is great. Thank you. But I got to ask, why Conor though? Because he took the sport to a whole new sphere, or something about his technique that blew you away, the man or the hype around him? And the answer is, I was offered money to do it. I was at the point where I was like, I want to write a book, something big, try and get something published on paper. And at the same time, I was approached to write this book about Conor McGregor. And I thought, that is a great window through which to do this, because you're going to get many, many more readers for a Conor McGregor book at the height of McGregor mania than you are for random book about MMA. So, and then if you read the book, a lot of it is like that. While it is a route through his life, there's an awful lot of diversions to talk about UFC 1, to talk about how MMA developed in this way or that way. The evolution of the wall walk, who Jose Aldo was, how he had become successful as an anti-wrestler. And I basically in that book, I tried to get as much not McGregor stuff into the McGregor story as possible. So if you read that, you probably have noticed that. But the downside of that is that where I hoped for as many people as possible to read it and then be like stealthily given a book about the details of MMA, there were a lot of dickheads who were like, Jack Slack wrote a whole book about McGregor. Oh, what does he know? And you're just like, oh, fuck's sake, mate. But it was a fun endeavor. It was hard work because I did it in about 3 months. And I set 3 weeks aside at the beginning to do all the research. And I was just absolutely fucking knackered by the end of that. And then I had to write. So it was a bit of a task. If I did it, I was going to say if I did it again, I'd do it differently in terms of time scale and setup and things, or if I were to write another book. But I'd also quite like to do that again. Just take 3 months, go balls to the wall, write something like that. But basically I had to put my work for Fightland on the back burner for the entire 3 months. So it's kind of hard to do. But yeah, the reason why, that was what was offered, and I thought I could do something special with it, and I think I did. Hey Jack, here's a question for a slow news week. YouTube reminded me today that Eddie Hall and Havbar, we'll call him Thor, aka The Mountain, are apparently going to box each other, and boxes in quotes there. Given their backgrounds in strongman and the fact that it's a one-off cash grab and not a career for them, what approach to the training and the game plan would you take if you were their coach? Obviously, they're not going to actually get good in the time frame they have, and I have to assume their chins will be solid as fuck. So a KO seems unlikely. I'd aim to just get them in good enough shape and disciplined enough to punch and keep their hands up for however long is scheduled, with the relative guarantee that the other will gas out and will be an open target. Cheers from Carl. Yeah, I think you're guaranteed to gas out. I'm presuming it's like 3 or 4 rounds. I think, obviously it is a cash grab. You could go out and look for the knockout, which, there is a little bit of animosity between them because of the deadlift. If you don't know, Eddie Hall did the 500 kilo deadlift, and then Thor just beat it the other day. But I think it was a pretty substantial margin. But Eddie Hall had it for quite a while. The thing about Eddie Hall is, for people who didn't watch, World's Strongest Man, Eddie Hall was the UK's or Britain's strongest man, 10 years running. And it wasn't even close. In static lifting, he is unbelievably strong. He was doing, after he retired and lost a load of weight, he was still on Brian Shaw's YouTube with Brian Shaw and, what's his name, Robert Oberhurst? But they're doing, pressing challenges, and Eddie's still out-pressing them by, 20 or 30 extra reps. But Eddie Hall hated events where you had to move. He was if everything should just be lifts and none of this dynamic shit. So, do I have a lot of faith in him having terrific cardio for this fight? No. I'd be looking for holding and uppercuts is what I'd be looking for. But I think it's probably just to be weird swings and then they fall into each other and clinch for a bit. It's just like the YouTube boxing thing. Again, cash grab. But now they're talking about Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather. I don't want to talk about it too much just in case it's just Keemstar putting out bullshit. But, just the other day, in the details of Canelo's contract, it was alleged that, he's having a lot of trouble with DAZN or DAZN, whatever they want to be called, because he wants to fight someone like Billy Joe Saunders, who's very legit, or Callum Smith. Both legit guys, and he says, they're legit guys, they're in line for they're the obvious contenders to fight me, and DAZN's like, yeah, but it won't count as one of your premier fights. So premier opponents that they've listed, Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, Floyd Mayweather. So one of those guys is 45 years old, the other two have never boxed. So it's just DAZN itself leaning into the idea that boxing is now just YouTube boxing. And I'm not one to clutch pearls, but Canelo is not only the biggest star in boxing, but he's probably the most respected name in boxing. No matter how you feel about the Golovkin fights, he fought him twice. He did amazing work, certainly in the second time at least. And then he went up to fight Kovalev, who's 2 weight classes bigger than him, and knocked him out. He's the star. He's the attraction. You don't need to do bullshit with it. But DAZN apparently think they do. Anyway, so YouTube boxing. I mean, I did something about KSI versus Logan Paul too a little while ago at Unibet. It is incredible. Those things are catching on. But then you're selling the animosity of it. And for the people who are in it, they like pretending to be boxers. They like having the robe, coming out with the big entrance and shit like that. Whereas most of these people have tours where they go and lip sync to songs and then take photos with fans. The one who actually surprised me is Jake Paul. He actually seemed capable of boxing pretty well. And I think that's what's interesting about it. I think they're doing it because they like it. They like the training of boxing and they like doing the boxing. I don't think I don't think Eddie Hall and Thor like boxing. I don't think that's particularly interesting to them. I think that this is just a cash grab based off perceived animosity between them. Whereas with people like KSI and Logan Paul, you get the sense that they do enjoy doing it. And if they can make millions of dollars for it, even better. Because, that's the sticking point for a lot of fans, boxing fans and purists, is that they're making millions of dollars from it and they haven't done the hard graft of being paid nothing for however many years. But yes, Eddie Hall versus Thor Bjornsson will be a tough man fight more than a boxing match. And honestly, I think they should play into that. I think they should just go out there and swing wild. Especially if you're Eddie, because Thor is like twice his height. But I have seen Thor boxing sparring, and he is another one of these. You see it with a lot of these strongman guys. They push their punches, big bodybuilder types. They push their punches, and they'll do a lot of like jabbing, but sort of leaning their own head away, looking away from the jab, not liking what's coming back, and they'll keep their other hand low. So I'd say Eddie Hall, get in there and use dipping jabs, because you could probably beat the man up with that. A dipping jab on its own is enough to win a carnival boxing match, and that is what this is. Someone send Eddie Hall a copy of How to Be an Ass-Whipping Boxer by JC Thomas. Cheers, Carl. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll be back on Monday to talk about these fights that happened. If you want to get in on the Patreon, support the podcast, and go and watch the new Film Room 7, It's All About Izzy, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Tyron Woodley's fantastic glutes bless.